Good morning and welcome to the show. So for those of you who are new to Media First, we are a media and communications training company based just outside of London and outside of Reading. Today we're going to be talking about podcasting. This show is actually something that we do for the Media Team Academy, which is a membership subscription that people can sign up to. You saw it running in the trailer there. If you want to know more about it, let us know. We'll tell you more about it. But in essence, it's a 12-month subscription for media teams and comms teams. So let us know. That's the end of the sales pitch. You can all relax now. And let's get into talking about podcasting. So podcasts are booming and businesses are turning to them to add variety and to bring a human voice to their content and brand. There are now more than 4 million podcasts registered around the world. And there are around 19 million podcast listeners in the UK alone. Listener predictions suggest that the number will increase to 28 million by 2026. In this masterclass, we're going to look at what you need to know about creating a branded podcast, how you can make it stand out in a crowded marketplace, what makes a good podcast presenter, and how to prepare your spokespeople to appear on a podcast. This month, I'll be joined on the show by Tom Idle. Good morning, Tom.
Morning, James. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us. I'll introduce Tom a little bit in a moment, but before I do that, guys, I want to open up Mentimeter and show you guys how to use that so that you can actually start interacting with us, because we do want to make this as interactive as we can. So if we can bring up that those instruction details on slide at the moment. So if you go to menti.com and enter in the code which you can see on screen, it's 22473856. Or you can scan that QR code. We've just got a few questions we want to ask you, get a bit better understanding about the people that are in the room, what you want to get from this session. We had loads of pre-submitted questions, which was fantastic. We're going to try and do our best to answer all of those as we go. I can see I'm loving the thumbs up, guys. Thanks very much for hitting that. I can see you all entering the room and making your way there. Is that thumbs up smashed to just over 50 straight away, so that's awesome. Whilst you're doing that, I'm just going to say a quick hello to a few people. I can see some names there of people that I recognise, existing clients, and some people that we're talking to at the moment. So I'm going to grab some people at random and say a quick hello. Chris O'Brien, you are going to make it onto my list. Cameron Black, hello. Alexander, Clark, Amy, welcome. Hello all. If you could just jump in there. Anybody else? Sorry if I've not shouted your name, but there's over 100 of you there. But if you could just jump into the chat and give it a quick hello, then we know that you can hear and see us all right. Hi, Jill. Right. There we go. Hopefully you guys are all in Menti. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions in a moment. But before we do that, let's do a proper hello to our guest, Tom Idle. So who is Tom? Well, Tom is a seasoned journalist and has spent the last 20 years working in business journalism and corporate communications. Previously, he was in-house editor, first at Local Government News and then at Sustainable Business. He was also editor-in-chief at 2 Degrees, an online community for sustainable professionals. In essence, Tom has been in the sustainable comms sector for over 20 years, so has been right at the forefront of that. Tom launched his first podcast in 2016, nearly 10 years ago, and it was a show designed to help all companies to be more environmentally mindful and was aptly named the Better Business Show. The show was a huge success, boasting over 4,000 weekly listeners, 38% of which were repeat listeners. Tom was also more successful than me in saying successful, in securing many big-name sponsorships, including KPMG and Nestle. Since then, Tom's worked with Media First to create and host various podcasts for our clients. These include podcasts for Syngenta Innovations called the Innovation Podcast, a podcast called Big Questions for Frontier Economics, economics consultancy, and a one-off special podcast for rap. Tom has also been involved in the launch of our very own podcast, The Media Landscape. So, Tom, finally, welcome to the show, mate.
Cheers, James. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining us. So, what was it like, 10 years ago? That was quite a long time ago in podcasting world, wasn't it?
It was,
to launch your own podcast.
Early days,
Yeah.
and I got addicted to them, and I thought I could do that for myself and use it as a perfect sort of sales and marketing vehicle, which I did.
Yeah. And I listened to it. I must confess, I didn't listen to all of them, but you rarely do listen to every podcast, do you, in a series?
Exactly.
But how did you find it? Like, was that a challenge? I imagine 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of support out there for how you create a podcast, how you launch a podcast. What sort of mistakes did you make in the early days?
It was bootstrapped, and I learned how to do it all on my own. Used all the software on my laptop. And just got it out there. But I sort of overcommitted, really. I decided to do a weekly podcast. And we ran for about 18 months and kind of run out of steam. But the time I was doing it was fantastic, but it's incredibly resource intensive. And it's a tough gig. It
is a tough gig, isn't it? Right, I'll come back and ask some more questions of Tom in a moment, but let's just get the audience involved here. So if we can get that Menti up, please. Hopefully you've all managed to sign in now. And I've got a couple of questions for you. Basically, we want to know whether or not your business currently has a podcast. Just a simple yes or no. So does your company currently have a podcast? Currently saying 42% of you say yes and 60% say no. But I suspect the fact that you're on this podcast means that you're either thinking about maybe producing one yourself or getting someone involved in producing one and launching one. Or maybe you are thinking about putting your spokespeople up to do more podcast interviews. Perhaps some of you could let me know in the chat. And then my next question, I can see many of you have answered that. We're approaching 100 answers on that. So basically 42 companies saying yes, they've got a podcast, and 58 saying no. But yeah, that's fantastic. Next question, and these are some of the questions that have come in just to inspire you. So these people have actually submitted these in advance. So thank you very much to these guys. In fact, there were a load more. We were kind of swamped with questions, which was really good because it helped us to figure out what we were going to share with you a bit later on over the next hour. But see, these are some of the questions on screen that we've been asked already. But my Menti question to you, to all you guys here, is what would you like to learn from this masterclass? So if you could just spend a couple of minutes or a minute just jotting that down for us, that's going to be super helpful. So whilst people are doing that, Tom, here they come. Best way to promote episodes.
Okay.
Why don't we start talking about that straight away and give people time to do it? Nothing like getting us on the hop. How to attract listeners. How would you measure podcast success? Okay, brilliant. Tools for hosting, getting started.
Yeah, one of the best bits of advice I had when I first launched was to not only record one episode, but to record a whole batch and launch them all at once. Just in the hope that audience can latch onto it and think, okay, they're not just it's not to be a one-off, it's going to be a series. So that was very, very beneficial.
Yeah.
And then just getting lots of your contacts and network to jump in and give 5-star reviews on iTunes was hugely helpful. Yeah, in those early days.
We'll talk more about that in a moment, guys. Let's just have a look at these. These are really helpful. So basics of getting started, equipment, we're going to be talking about that. Gaining and keeping engagement, clear speaking, right tech, we're going to be talking about that. Producing your own, yes or no, tips, we'll be talking about that. How to engage an audience, we'll be talking about that. Okay, this is good. This is good. You're in the right place. This is cool. Okay, well, let's jump into it. If there's any questions that we don't answer, because there's 62 responses there and a growing number, but if there's any questions that we don't answer, forgive us, but we will endeavour to answer that in a different way. Maybe we'll create a podcast on it. Maybe we'll do a pre-recording. Maybe we'll do a blog. So keep an eye on our socials and obviously make sure you're signed up to our blog. But we'll be sure to email you because we've got all your details, so we'll get those responses out. But we'll do our best to answer as many of these as you can. Right, let's start off then. Should you create your own podcast, or is it better to be a guest on someone else's podcast? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's pros and cons to both.
Yep.
Obviously, there's some great podcasts out there that you can sort of get involved with and be a guest on. There's a ready-made audience. It's quick and efficient to do that. Investing in your own podcast has loads of benefits. You've got control. You can start building a brand. You can use it for sales and marketing. But it is much more tricky, and it requires some investment.
Yeah.
So there's two ways of looking at it, really.
Yeah, I agree. And I suppose even if you are looking to create your own audience, maybe you've already got a bit of a captive audience. They listen to your blog, they read your blogs, for example, things like that. One of the things that we've done recently is, because we've got a decent following of our blogs that we create, but we've actually started recording those blogs and launching them on our podcast.
Okay.
And that's helped us find a whole new audience, so people can just listen to our blogs instead of. That's a really nice way of testing out whether or not your audience is interested in audio. If you're already doing blogs, start recording them. And, that doesn't require a huge amount of investment and time to be able to do that.
Exactly. And it's a different type of audience, listening and engaging in a completely different way.
Yeah.
And we talked about this before we came on air about where do you listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
And I think crucially, we listen to podcasts when we're not working.
Yeah.
And most corporate content, blogs, things like that, you're looking at on the fly as you're working at your desk.
Yeah.
Podcasts, you're in the gym, you're in the kitchen, you're in the car. You're in a different mindset and you're engaging that much more. And that's the crucial thing, I think, with podcasts.
Yeah. And we've got a slide on that, haven't we? In fact, looking at the different places where people listen to podcasts. We'll pop that up in a moment. Got some stuff here on listeners' behaviour. I think we can jump through this, actually, Mr. Wallace, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. Podcasting activity, yeah. So hopefully you guys can see that. But this is, where people are listening to the most. And as Tom's just pointed out there, the very top one is whilst they're at home relaxing. The other one is, when they're doing housework or gardening. I know, Tom, you said you listen to podcasts when you're watering your garden, watering the plants.
Week. Yeah, certainly.
Certainly this week, yeah, it's been hot. When travelling in the car, lots of us listen to it when travelling in the car. I certainly do. That's probably where I listen to them the most.
Yeah.
And I'll probably repeat this at some point, but someone's asked, what's the ideal length of a podcast? And we find that 40 minutes is a really good length for a podcast.
Yeah.
It's hard to kind of pinpoint why that works. That seems what all the evidence suggests, that 40 minutes is a good length.
Yeah.
But I suspect, if it was just me, looking around my little bubble, that people have a commute of either, let's say they've got a 20-minute commute, they can listen to it in the way to work, and then finish it off on the way back. Yeah. Kind of gives them something to look forward to almost on the way back.
Yeah.
Or if they've got a longer commute of maybe 40 minutes, they've got the whole episode.
Absolutely. I think a lot of different podcasts are playing around with the timings of it.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of The Diary of the CEO.
Yeah.
Stephen Bartlett's podcast, which has been going for a long, long time now. But I think he's just started extending to about 90 minutes.
Really?
And I suspect he's got a really impressive team behind him doing a lot of crunching of data to say that that's probably about right for his audience. But it depends on your audience, who you're targeting, what type of people they are, how much time they've got, all those sorts of things.
Yeah. Maybe all their audience have a 40-minute commute to work. Listen on the way in and on the way back. I do like the idea of having something to listen to on the way back that I've been listening to on the way in. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I look forward to that. Yeah, it's cool. So you've created a lot of podcasts with our clients. What's that process been like? How's that? Because it's different to creating your own podcast?
Absolutely, yeah. It's trying to work out what the objective is for those particular clients and what they're trying to achieve. And then getting into kind of the planning process, really. What are their kind of key messages? What do they want to get across? Working up different formats for them. So yeah, a lot of the time spent with those clients is in the planning phase, and then the kind of execution, the recording, the edits, and sitting down with guests, people in their business is the kind of the easy bit, really.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of front loading of kind of getting into the planning nitty gritty, really.
Yeah, you said to me once that kind of 90% of the podcast is done in the planning.
Absolutely.
10% is a recording phase.
Yeah, almost scripting it out. What do you want to say throughout this 40-minute episode? Writing it all out, planning it, and then when the execution happens, it's making that sound as natural as possible, as if you're just having a conversation. But there's so much kind of up the front that you need to do to make sure you're going to hit all the right messages.
But it's storyboarding it, isn't it, as opposed to scripting it?
Exactly.
It's
storyboarding you could use the two words interchangeably, really. But that's exactly what I mean. It's storyboarding. It's working out how you're going to get from A to B to C through that podcast. What's the narrative flow? What are the key messages you want to get across? And then really refining the format so that it comes across in a way that hits the brand and the kind of the strategy of that client. But I mean, we've worked with a number of clients now, and I mean, we worked with Sagentia, who were going through a period during COVID where they couldn't really get their consultants in front of people easily. So they wanted a vehicle to make their consultants, their people, seem human, and to get their voice out there so that the audience could really understand what these people were all about. And the podcast was the perfect vehicle for that.
Yeah, I think it's great from that, that human content side, isn't it? Really good at building trust in a brand and things. The other thing we're going to break down actually the Sagentia podcast in a moment and pull it up into almost like a pie chart of the different, how we figured out what that was going to look like. Because each show, one of the best bits of advice I'd give to anybody looking to create their own podcast is to create a formulaic format that they can repeat, something that is repeatable. And that might be, that you've got an interview section where you've got a 10-minute interview with a guest, for example, but always have that in the same place each week, or each month or whatever it is you're going to do. You might have a 10-minute kind of product showcase, for example, or a 5-minute product showcase. Again, always have that in the same spot. And that creates, you can really get an understanding of how to pull a podcast together. If you start to break it down like that. It's something that they do a lot in radio when, you start with the 60-minute clock face and you work it backwards. And we'll show you how we do that in a moment. Before we do that, though, we do want to look at the content side of stuff. So whether or not you're a spokesperson or you're a presenter, a host, we use something in our media training called truth. And I'd like to pull that slide up here. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, guys. So truth is something we say that journalists are really good at getting to the truth. And it's ultimately what the audience is looking for. So they're looking for something that's topical. It's topical, it's timely, it's trending. It's something that is of interest to them in that moment. Yes, podcasts can be evergreen. And by that, I mean that they can last a long time. And so you shouldn't necessarily do anything that dates them if that's what you want to get from it. But the best performing podcast, the best performing content we all know will be topical content. It will be of the moment and it will be, up to date. So topicality is really important. The other thing is relevance. Just really understanding your audience. The beautiful thing about podcasts is that you can be so niche. There was one question that I saw pop up earlier, which was, how do you measure the success of a podcast? And I think, first of all, you've got to define what you want to achieve out of your podcast. With our podcast, personally, I'm not worried about listener numbers. I don't mind how many people listen to it. But what I do want is for them to get real value out of it and then to kind of become engaged with the rest of our brand. So what I'm looking for is for people to listen to our podcast and then hop onto our print, edition of content, our blogs, and sign up to our marketing lists and things like that. That for me is most important. But the relevance is really key. So if you're helping someone to prepare when they're a guest, think about how they can be relevant, how that your company can be relevant to that podcast, to that audience. But also think about when you're thinking about creating a podcast, how can that podcast be relevant to your niche audience? Unusual is the U. Some people often think it's unique, but there's no such thing really as something that is unique. I don't think that unique anymore. I think it's just unusual. It's something a little bit different. There's some brilliant podcast formats out there. There's one in particular that I listen to when I'm downtime, relaxing, not a work-orientated one. And the podcast host, he records his introduction when he's out walking his dog. So the first 4 or 5 minutes of it, he's out walking his dog, leaves rustling, it's raining, he talks you through what's going on, but he's introducing a guest that he's then interviewing. Right. The actual interview happens in a different setting, but think about how you can do things a little bit different. Trouble is, you're solving a problem, you're introducing something that's negative. You should be looking to do that. And that's something that's really going to help make your content stand out and make it interesting for people. And the final piece is human interest, the final piece of the jigsaw. So the more of this type of content, this truth content that you can get within your podcast, or any of the content that you create, or your spokespeople can get when they're on a podcast out, the more interesting it's going to be to listeners. So that's just something to really bear in mind. We started talking before we pulled up that slide, Tom, about building a format and why you should do that. And I've just got a few points about why I think that's so important. Sometimes we hear podcasts, don't we, where it's just like music, chat, music. It's just super dull. Yeah. Or you might hear, sometimes I hear a business podcast where they've really done a really good production at the start, but then kind of nothing in between.
Yeah, yeah.
How did you find that?
Well, I think going back to your point, I think we all like routine and we all like familiarity, and I think actually creating that sort of quite formulaic structure is really helpful to the audience, not just to the people producing it. For the Better Business Show, again, mine was very formulaic. I started with a sort of 5-minute monologue, sort of introducing the subject. Then I'd go to a kind of pre-recorded interview with the subject, and at the end I'd bring in one of my sort of journalist friends and we'd have a chat about what was newsy that week. And so your audience, they kind of get familiar, they feel comfortable with what they're about to listen to, they know where they are, and it's all those things that just builds that kind of trust and sort of brand loyalty. Yeah. I think format's really important. I mean, there's so many different formats out there that people can adopt, and that really is up to the budget, I guess. A lot of it comes down to the budget, but also what you've got capability for in-house or using an agency.
You did one recently, didn't you, with Rap, where you had the chief exec of Rap, and they had items. Tell us about that. How does that work?
So he was the outgoing chief exec of Rap, and he wanted to do a kind of like almost like a legacy sort of interview, really. What he's been involved in over the last 10 years or however long he was there, and so we got him to pick 10 items, and this was anything from a plastic milk bottle to a medal that he'd won, and he got up in the middle of the recording and went to the other side of the room, picked up the item, came back, held it, rustled it, and then discussed what he was holding. So it was kind of like painting a picture for the audience of what was in the room. Yeah. And it was just a really nice touch of just bringing that to life and making him more human. And we could have talked about all the different things he's achieved, but it just added an extra flavour.
Yeah, it was almost like going through the attic, wasn't it?
Yes.
And bringing down the items. It worked really well.
Yeah, and it helped illustrate all that he'd achieved. Yeah. So it was very sort of business orientated, but it made it human, which I think is really what this is all about.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. We're going to pop up a slide looking at the why build a podcast. So music, chat, music. We know it's super dull. I think we're summarising everything that we've probably said here. Consistency. Certainly it saves time, 100%. Builds a quality offering. It means that you can kind of practice different things, and you can drop different elements. You know, if you go, actually, I'm not sure that segment's working, that 5-minute segment there.
Yeah.
Just drop it, get rid of it, change it up, you know, and add something new in, try something different. Audience knows what to expect. You've just been talking about that. And Darren says, we're going to hear from Darren a bit later on, but Darren says we need to treat our audience like drunks, which means that we need to be signposting. And what we mean by that is people aren't listening to podcasts in the same way that they're potentially watching TV, for example. You know, they are already, as we've seen, you know, they're in the car, they're washing up, they're looking after their kids, whatever. So you have to kind of signpost quite a lot, and you have to say, coming up, we're doing this, or, you know, this is what we're going to teach you, or this is what we're going to show you, or, you know, things like that. So that signposting piece is really important. Just quickly, typical format. So few seconds of music, a presenter intro, a montage of interviews is a really nice way of doing it, and Darren's going to show us that in a moment. Into the main interview, and then signposting for new chapters, you know, go and listen to the other bits, and your call to action, in essence. But we'll break that down in a bit. Well, let's break that down now, actually. We're going to show you some pie charts here. So what have we got? Right, the media landscape. So this was our podcast, the Media First podcast. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Go and take a look. The first series of it was a 15-minute weekly podcast. At the moment, series 2, we're doing audio versions of our blog, so it's a slightly different format to this. But this is a breakdown of season 1. So first bit was an introduction, 90 seconds introduction. Then we had a headline news item, which was about 4 minutes long. Then we had a couple of other news items, which were 2 minutes long each. And we had a regular feature interview, which was 5 minutes. And Tom, that was kind of similar to your bit of we called it, I think it was, Meet the Journalist or something like that? I can't remember what we called it, but that's what that segment there was. And then we had outro and credits, which were 30 seconds. Interspersed amongst all that, you had lots of other stuff. So almost if you imagine in between those gaps of that pie chart, we had, you know, stings and music and adverts and stuff like that, you know, which really bring some audio branding. And that's what Darren's going to talk about in a moment. We've got another one here, though, on Sagentia Innovation. So this was a 45-minute regular podcast. So the intro and teasers was a couple of minutes. The topic summary was 3 minutes. So that's almost 5 minutes of, Tom, this was you in this case, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Explaining what that podcast was about.
Exactly. Explaining, what are you just about to hear?
Yeah.
Then you hear it, and then we wrap up by telling people what they've heard.
What they've heard.
You know, that's it.
And the meet the guest section, you know, that's 8 minutes, but that was more human, wasn't it? That was what their background is and stuff.
Yeah, we tried to get them to loosen up, and we included a lot of that in the final edit. It was kind of like, you know, so what motivates you to get out of bed in the morning, that type of stuff. So people really got to understand the guests, who they were, and then we got into the sort of the meat of it, the sort of technical stuff.
Exactly. So we did the topic in depth, which was sort of 10 minutes, you know. And that wasn't, you know, none of these are sales pitchy podcasts, but, you know, that was really an overview of what's going on in the industry or in the world, wasn't it? And then the in practice at Sagentia was more about, you know, how they're helping their customers and what they're doing and what they're putting in place, wasn't it?
Yeah, a lot of that planning was about, okay, so what's the challenge? What's the subject?
Yeah.
What's the challenge we know our audience wants to understand or can kind of, you know, can understand and get their validation from because they're going through the same problem. And then the second half of the podcast was about, okay, so what's the solutions here?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how we broke it down.
Almost the trouble element of the truth acronym, wasn't it? And again, in between all of those sections, you know, we had music, we had jingles, we had other stuff. In fact, we're going to throw to Darren, I believe now, and he's going to take us through some of that, some of those different assets that we've got available. And as Darren's talking about that, I will check over some of these questions that are coming in. Thank you very much. Keep them coming. So Darren, you there, mate?
I am. Hello.
Hello.
Just stood here outside of in our media suite here, just outside Studio 3, where we normally do the Media Team Academy from, but also things that we do here. You know, we do our own podcasts and we take time to craft our podcasts into something with a bit of variation and give it more interest that we obviously call post-production. And the things we have at our disposal are the montages, the music beds, the stings, the jingles, the credits, and the adverts. So let's kind of just dive into those then and just kind of unpick what they are. So we already touched about montages, and really what a montage is that burst of energy to create a sense of FOMO, the good old-fashioned fear of missing out. You know, they're your most exciting clips, and as you normally see, like on the news, for example, they tease the bit where you want to go, oh, I want to hear more of that, but don't give you everything. Normally rule of three, and it makes the listener want to listen longer and to listen more. So here's an example from one of our podcasts we did for Sagentia. Have a look at this.
The more you start to question, you think, oh my goodness, we have an opportunity to make a difference here.
Crazy IVF solutions with, all of the bells and whistles when 1 in 10 girls in the UK still suffer from period poverty and can't get access to feminine hygiene products. And that's in the UK alone. And that's insane.
So under that, of course, you heard music, and music's really, really important using music beds, because what that does is it sets the tone and it sets strong emotion. It's a strong emotion creator, and it sets the style of your podcast. It's really important to get this right. So when you're looking for music, think about who it's for. Think about your brand. So music, for example, for a fizzy drink is very different than the music you choose for an expensive perfume. Now, luckily, you've got a whole heap of music to choose from. There's what we call library music, very budget friendly, and some great quality music out there. All you've got to do is just go on to Google or whatever and just search library music, and there's loads of it. But it's used by everyone from Netflix to your YouTuber. So there's loads and loads to use. But how do you use it? Well, you won't, you'll find library music, and there's loads of it, and you found the bit you want. You kind of get this 3-minute bit of music. But what you shouldn't do is just start the music where it is, because what they do when they make library music is they make it in chunks so you can use it for different bits. So the best thing to do is to find the right 20 seconds and loop it. And normally it's good to find a piece of music that isn't too busy. So for example, if you want to tease something or introduce somebody, you don't really want to talk over a saxophone, certainly not someone singing. No singing in library music normally. So make sure you take that and then loop it. So the example we're going to use here is where we actually were in here and we were interviewing, and we did a podcast, and we came back about a week later and we realized there was a boring bit. So we need to do what's called an inject, where we summarize what's just been happening, which is a really good way to kind of just summarize the end of that and then throw forward to the next bit. So have a listen to this.
It's just based on the training sets.
So that's Eileen and Erica, super smart women making some really great points. Of course, these things are not working for women. They haven't been designed with women in mind, and women haven't been in the room at the design and development stages of these products. As more and more evidence becomes available to make this point, Eileen tells me that it's now all about education and raising awareness of the issue.
It's awareness.
So then we're going to look at stings and jingles, and what they are really. We talked about, thinking about people like drunks and kind of grazing through a podcast sometimes. It's a really good way to grab their attention back and say, look, we've just stopped something, or we're about to start something else. So it can be, say, look, in a new chapter marker, or perhaps it's a feature about to start. And normally, we take the music that we've already got to give it some brand consistency, and we'll take a 5-second piece of that and use that as a sting. So here's the example of a sting to end up in on stings. And then we go on to credits. Now, you might think, well, what's people are turning off after credits? Why do we have those? Well, in the podcast, it's a really nice way and a subtle way to humanize your company or organization by having the names of everyone involved mentioned at the end. You normally see it on or hear it on Radio 4, and it's quite a nice little touch, really. And finally, we're on to adverts. Now, the great thing about adverts is the thing that you have at your disposal when you're having a podcast that's really, really rare. It's in the palm of your hands, and that's people's attention. You really shouldn't waste that. So, when you have that, what would you like to promote or to your audience? think about what you can get them to do and take advantage of that attention. Best thing to do is to keep it succinct and keep it interesting. We could do a whole podcast on this. We always say sell the sizzle rather than the sausage. So you're selling the benefits of your product rather than the product itself. That's a really good thing to think about. So here's an example of an advert that we've done promoting our spokesperson CPD service. And we tend to produce our adverts in a kind of a multimedia way. So if you want to close your eyes, you can. You'll find it works just as well as an audio only, as well as the video. So have a look at this.
One of the biggest challenges you face as a spokesperson is having to switch from your day job straight into spokesperson mode. The reality is you've got to remember the skills that you've been taught, you've got to practice the messaging, but the more you practice that and the more you learn about those skills and those techniques, the more it becomes like muscle memory. So the spokesperson CPD program, which stands for Continuous Professional Development, has been designed to provide spokespeople, whether you're doing presentations or someone doing media interviews. It's there to help you to develop your skills, to help you to go beyond the learning that we've already provided you. We've got a quarterly masterclass program, online webinars, access to a whole range of blogs specific and particular to media spokesperson. You also have access to our online courses such as media training refreshers, crisis management, presentation skills, and much more, keeping your knowledge just topped up so that when you do have to make that switch, you can do it really quickly and really effectively. If you'd like to find out more about the CPD program or any of the other training or online programs that we create, get in touch with anybody here at Media First and we'll all be glad to help you.
Oh, we've just crowbarred in an advert. Oops. So those are the things really you've got at your disposal. So have a kind of quick summary of those. So they are the montage, the music beds, the stings, the jingles, the credits, and the adverts. Loads of stuff there to add real good mixture of quality and interest to your podcast. James.
Thanks very much, Aaron. So next up, we're going to look at some of the kit that you need. Now, this can be almost as simple or as complicated as you want to make it. But why would you ever want to make it more complicated? So let's try not to do that. The first and the most important thing is a really decent microphone. Now, we're obviously in a podcasting studio. This is a dedicated podcasting studio just outside of Reading. This is our own place. We've got some really amazing gear here, which I'll give you a little show around. Darren's told me that I need to be really careful with this. So these microphones here, I'm going to be talking into the back of the microphone. So look, I'm not even sure if that's going to work. Hopefully you're not looking up my nose. But these are Pod Mix. They're by Rode. And we've got these paired up to one of these Podcaster Pros, which is our mixing desk. And you can see we've got two mics on at the moment, mic 1 and mic 2, so myself and Tom. And we're running this all through another mixing desk because we've got our TV studio connected to it as well. But you don't need to go to this level. You don't need to have a Rodecaster Pro. But you do need to have something that you can record it onto. So that could be a laptop. It could be a USB. It could be anything like that. But the most important thing is the microphone. They don't cost loads of money, but do expect to spend, 140 quid, something like that, on a decent mic. And ideally, if you can, make sure that all of your guests have the same mic, because that's really going to help you in terms of the audio quality, consistency, it sounding the same. Definitely, whatever you do, do not record any audio on Zoom or Teams. You can record podcasts remotely, and I'll show you some software to be able to do that in a moment. It's really cheap, $15 a month or something like that. But just don't use Zoom or Teams, because immediately what Zoom and Teams do is it compresses the audio quality and means it doesn't sound anywhere near as crisp. It makes the editing process and any post-production much, much harder. And it can sound really tinny, especially if people are using, their own built-in microphone on their laptop and stuff like that.
I'm laughing because every episode of the show was recorded on Zoom.
I know it was, mate. I know it was. But we're talking 10 years ago.
Well, that's true.
You wouldn't do that now.
True. I used to get people to turn their video off, which helped the audio.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did it all remote.
Yeah.
Mainly because most of the guests were in the States or wherever, and it was, and they say it was a long time ago.
10 years ago. But I mean, that was cutting edge technology then. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
When you think about it. But, nowadays, there's no excuse for not having a decent quality microphone. The other thing you can do, and I'll go back to the GoPro, but is even if you can't get these microphones here that we're using at the moment, like you can see the whole studio. I'll give you a quick turn around. You can see it's pretty cool, isn't it? But these ones here, this is a Rode NT USB Mini. Now, as the name suggests, it's a USB microphone. So what's really nice about this is you can actually plug it in, obviously, to your computer, just a USB into your computer and then plug it into here. You've also got a headphone output in here, which is really helpful so that you can, when you're doing a podcast, you can have your cans on, as we call them. The nice thing about that is you can really pick up, if there's any hum from the air conditioning or any noises. If you're just doing it and just trusting your ears without listening through, funny enough, as I just hear a siren go past outside, you will really hear it on the headphones. You've also got a microphone, headphone control volume on the front of these. These are like 80 quid, 100 quid, something like that is perfect. And this is something that we've got a bunch of these. And when we're recording podcasts remotely, what we actually do quite often is we just post these out to people and post them out, give them pre-stamped envelope to be able to post them back to us. And, that way we know we're going to get some decent quality, even if we are recording it remotely. The other thing, let's talk about software quickly. So that's the hardware. There's loads of information out there, but if you want to know more, by all means, get in touch with us and we can guide you through it. But the most important thing is a decent quality mic. The second thing is the software. We spoke about Zoom and stuff. Hopefully we can get this pulled up on screen. I'd like to be able to show you something called Riverside FM. And there are various versions of this. But in essence, what it does is it allows you to record audio remotely and it not degrade the audio quality. So it doesn't compress it at all. And the way it does that is by recording it locally. So let's say, for example, I was on a call on Riverside with Tom. And what it would do is it would record Tom's microphone locally and it would record my microphone locally. And then it would upload them to a central cloud where we could download them afterwards. Go and check out Riverside. It's fantastic for that. From that perspective, will give you the best quality audio that you're likely to be able to get when you're doing, a podcast remotely. Works really, really well. Couple of other bits of software that we use a hell of a lot when we're creating podcasts, so worth making a note of. One is called Trint, which is fantastic, and the other ones I'll talk about is Buzzsprout, which is something that we use. But Trint is it transcribes the audio for you. So you can upload audio to it, whether it's video audio, whether it's just pure audio like podcast audio. You can upload it and it will transcribe it all for you and it will break it down by the speakers. The other brilliant thing about Trint, and we use it a lot for editing, is you can edit on paper with it, as I say. And I'll talk more about how we actually put that into, how we use that within our editing process. In terms of editing software, something like Audacity is good. We use Adobe Suite, which is a lot more expensive, but Audacity is free. So go and check that out if you did want to do your own editing. The nice thing about Audacity is it's non-destructive. What that means basically is if you edit a piece out, if you clip a piece of content out or a section out and go, I don't want that bit, it won't actually delete it. It just kind of hides it, which means you can get it back, which is really helpful. So whatever software you're using, just look for non-destructive editing software. And when it comes to uploading of software to, uploading of podcasts, to Apple iTunes, to Spotify, we'd recommend something like Buzzsprout. We use Buzzsprout. It's fantastic, dead easy. You create your show in there, you upload it, and you can select what channels you ping it to, whether it goes to Spotify, and it will do it for you automatically. It will ping it out there. You've got to do some SEO bits, around the show description, maybe transcribe the show and put that up there. That can sometimes help to get more clicks. But it depends whether or not you're creating something that you want people just to find and stumble across, or if you've already got an existing audience and you just want to mail shot a show out there. But yeah, Buzzsprout, go and check that out. That would be our recommendation. Right, the final thing I'd like to do, because I do want to go to, there's a bunch of questions in there that you guys have submitted, and I'd like to go and have a look at those. And also you put a bunch at the start, didn't you, on Menti? Everybody did. So, but before I do that, I'd just like to go through the 2-day editing process. Tom, we've worked a lot on podcasts together.
Yes, we have, yeah.
And it's never as quick as you think, is it, to edit a podcast?
No. It's a process that can be sped up through great planning.
Yeah.
But I think the nature of the beast is that what you really want from your guests, from the people taking part in that podcast, is great stories. And it's down to presenters and producers to kind of get those stories out of people. But sometimes it takes more than one or two goes at it. Yep. So there's always going to be an edit process. But I think if you can plan your episodes well, then the edit is a lot easier. But it still takes some work.
Yeah, sometimes you get really lucky with a podcast, but sometimes, I mean, invariably, even if you've got the best recordings in the world, right up front, the best content, the best guests, you end up listening to the same podcast all the way through, probably 4 or 5 times. Yeah. Which can drive you slightly potty, can't it?
Yeah, there's no way of avoiding that.
There's just no way of avoiding it, unfortunately. Yeah, I've got something, we call it the 2-day editing process, and if we pop that up on screen, please, Ian. But in essence, the first thing that we do once we've got the audio, so we're not going to be turning this into a podcast, but the first thing you would do is clean the audio. Now, we actually outsource that to another company who does that for us. It's something that we could do in-house, but, to do it really well, you've got to be exceptional, and these guys are really good at it, so they do that for us. What that means is they're removing any sirens, they're removing any hums, they're getting the levels absolutely spot on, air conditioning noises, stuff like that. You can mitigate a lot of that stuff by making sure you've got enough soft furnishings and things like that within a room. But it's getting it cleaned is the first phase. Once you've done that, you have a first listen through, and we do what we call a paper edit. So, we're looking at the narrative and the storyboard at that point. Does it all make sense? Does it all come together? Is it, hitting the objectives of what we were trying to set out to do? And we do that in Trint. That means that we're not focused on, removing ums and ahs and, thinking about the editor. We're not doing it with an editing suite, and I think that's important. You're just listening to it and going, does this story come together? Does it work? Does it make sense? Then you've got a second listen, because one of the beautiful things with Trint is you can actually clip it. You can actually go, right, remove that bit there, highlight a section of text and delete it, and you can play it, and it will play without that section that you've just deleted. So you can do that, and you can have a listen through. And the other nice thing with Trint is it will timestamp it. So if you then give that, you can export it as a PDF, and you can give it to an audio editor and go, these are where I want these edits to be made. And it will tell you, right, you want from 36.2 seconds taken out to, 42 seconds or whatever. So really nice. So the second listen, really, you're beginning to think about presenter links. Darren played some examples of that. Removing some of the jargon, just making sure it's getting a bit tighter. At that point, recording of links. Now, Tom, you'd script those links, wouldn't you, obviously?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the beauty of working with audio. You can read off a script. As long as you don't seem like you're reading off a script, that's the beauty of it, really.
Yeah.
So, I'd script everything. Everything I'm going to say, I write down exactly the word for word.
Yeah.
And then on the fly, when I'm reading it, I might then sound a lot more natural, as if I'm just
adapt
making it up.
And adjust it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a skill in itself, isn't it? Which is, why it's so important, I think, to have professional podcast hosts such as yourself doing.
I think so, yeah. I think there's a sort of journalistic element to it. But it's something that you kind of learn and gain more experience with to sound as natural as possible. You want people to want to listen to you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And we've all listened to those podcasts where you've just got the wrong host or presenter who just is not nailing it. It just puts you off. It makes you cringe, and you just don't want to tune in again.
Yeah, definitely. Third listen is it's another paper edit. You're honing it down. And it's only really at this point that you've added in the links that the presenter has recorded. So you've not heard it with the links all in there. You've not heard the full thing until you've listened to it a third time round, for sure. Another edit once you've got the links in, and then finally the last thing that goes in is the audio branding, with the beds and the stings that Darren showed us about later. The final listen is with new ears. And when I say new ears, I mean new people. Get them listening to it. Let's have a look at some of these questions if we can. So, how do we stop so many ums and so's? Jill has asked this question, and I love this. Lots of people start their sentence with so. So let me think about how I'm going to respond to this question. I did that intentionally. Tomo just ignored me. We've got a brilliant blog on that, Jill, if you want to go to our website. So mediafirst.co.uk/blog and have a look if you search for so, and you will find a blog that's been written by Adam, our content editor, on the use of so's and how you can avoid using so's and removing so many arms. But the first thing is just to practice. Second thing is to have some form of training, media training, build confidence. But also don't worry about it. People don't, I think when you start listening out for it, you hear it, but not many people listen out for it. Some of it you can also take out in post, but we will never take everything out, all the ums and ahs in post.
No.
It just doesn't sound natural. If you're a robot. Someone here has said, when it comes to B2B podcasts, could you please share some insight that would be valuable to understand the landscape and dynamic of this industry? It's growing. People are creating more and more business podcasts, as we said during the introduction. It's certainly something, anecdotally at least, that we're getting a lot more requests for podcast training. So whether it's a spokesperson who's going to be going and doing a podcast and they want to have some media training to help them with that. Now, that training to be a podcast guest is very different than training to be a radio studio guest, isn't it, Tom?
Yep.
What are those differences, do you think?
Well, when I've had guests on podcasts, you can tell whether they've had media training, because often their responses are quite clipped, very succinct, very to the point, key messages, very on point. And it doesn't often make for a very good podcast guest, actually, because you kind of want them to open up. It's a different sort of medium. And
it's a different medium.
And you want people to relax. You want them to tell stories. They don't need to get to the heart of the point as quick as possible, like you would if you were on a short
news
radio
show
segment.
or a radio segment or something
so
like
it
that.
is different. It does demand a different set of skills that can be taught. But it's completely different.
I think the skills are the same, but it's actually adjusting to that audience, isn't it? Adjusting to that format.
Yeah.
And it is something that we are seeing a lot more of our clients now are saying, okay, don't just do print TV. Actually, they're sending someone in for a half day just to spend time in this environment and do these types of...
And the other thing to say about the kind of B2B landscape, it is booming and it's getting more and more niche. Which again is something to think about in terms of this audience of people wanting to get into podcasting. Don't be afraid to embrace the niche, because it's not really about audience figures because of the engagement level. So it's not about numbers. It's not about trying to hit the mainstream like you would if you were getting into the media or trying to get a segment on a radio show. You can be as niche as you want. Yeah. And the audience will just find you. And that's the beauty of it.
And I think that is definitely niche with a podcast. And I know I've heard of people creating podcasts just for one company, like a customer that they wanted to get in touch with. Yeah. They wanted to get to that company. So they created podcasts specifically for that one brand to try and target them. They're basically going, I'm creating a podcast for 20 listeners here. Yeah. 20, the senior leadership team of this brand.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. Someone's asked a question, I can't quite see the name there, but what do you think, Louise, hi Louise, what do you think about the trend of filming podcasts these days to post on YouTube? Yeah, interesting one, this. I think it's something that lots of people are doing. I think it definitely works with a younger demographic. They're more likely, the younger demographic is much more likely to watch a podcast than they are to listen to a podcast. My 18-year-old son is more likely to listen to it than watch. My 13-year-old son is more likely to watch than listen. So definitely kind of this new generation that's coming up, that's definitely where it's heading. I think there are different reasons why you might want to do a video podcast. And there are ways of doing, both, obviously. There's no reason why you can't do both at the same time.
You can watch them on Spotify as well now.
You can?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Which I don't realise,
Yeah. Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm not a watcher, Louise, of podcasts.
No, I'm not either, but I noticed the other day you can start doing that.
Yeah. Fascinating. Spotify obviously think it's going to be something that's going to work. Maybe it's where we need to be heading, but I suspect it is that younger demographic, to be honest with you. Who do you outsource your audio cleaning to? Private message me, I'll let you know, because I can't remember their details, to be honest with you. But yeah, a guy that I've been working with for a long time. Any other questions there, guys, that we need to... is Trint the best transcribing tool for transcribing podcast videos for accessibility? I don't know, if I'm honest with you, but it's certainly a really good tool. If it's for accessibility purposes, then you might want to have a look and see what else there is. But I'm assuming you're talking about kind of putting up subtitles and things like that.
It's not perfect, is it?
It's not perfect. No transcribing tool is, but they probably use all the same background software anyhow, truth be told. But it's just one that we particularly like, or I particularly like, so yeah, worth having a look at. Right, couple more minutes, guys, and then I will leave you all to it. But quick questions. We've got a bit of a summary. I'm going to give you some top tips before we do that. So hang on for those top tips. But Andrew has said, quick question, are there any figures on average listener numbers for podcasting to help benchmarking? So you can figure that out. You can there are tools which will help give you some kind of listener numbers on other podcasts. Have a Google around, Andrew, and see what you can find. But again, don't worry too much about comparing yourself and benchmarking. Ultimately, define what your own success is. If you want to go, if you want to promote an ebook, promote the ebook and look at the downloads that you're getting off that. Create a distinct URL that you only market via the podcast and poke people to that, signpost people to that. And then you'll have some idea as to whether or not people are listening and they're following through. But don't stress the audience numbers. And, instead market it in different ways. Have your email list, go out to your socials, put it on the bottom of your email signatures, things like that.
Also, make that piece of content you've created and invested in and spin it into a different piece of content.
Yeah.
Whether a blog comes off the back of it or something else. Because not everyone listens to podcasts, but you've gone through that whole rigmarole of setting up that podcast. Make it work.
Yeah, sweat the asset, so to speak. Yeah, definitely. Slice and dice it, and use it in as many different ways. How can you find a media partner for your podcast series? You found one, Andrea. Come to us. By all means, get in touch. Let us know how we can help. I think one of my top tips is going to be, I'll go through them in a moment, but definitely don't try and do everything yourself. We won't try and do everything ourselves. We have other people that we go out to for different elements of the podcast production process. Most of it we do in-house these days, but there are definitely times when we will go out. It's just quicker and easier. People are professionals at audio cleaning. People are professionals at recording audio. People are professionals at editing. Yeah, lots of people can edit, but can you actually do it to a really, really good level? And just because you can video edit doesn't mean you can audio edit. They're different skill sets entirely. So just on that, quick fire top tips to leave you with. Be niche. Don't stress listener numbers. Aim for 30 to 45 minutes. Stick to one host. We have in the past had clients who have said, can we have a different host each month and each episode? And it's a nightmare to edit. So try and avoid it. Stick to one host. Allow them to become good. Invest in that host. If it's not going to be a professional journalist or a podcast presenter, and it's going to be someone from within your team, invest in them, give them some training, and give them the best chance of being successful. Brief spokespeople, but don't over prepare. Tom, what do we say to people when they turn up with their laptop?
Yeah. Close that laptop. Yeah. We want them to be prepared.
Yeah.
So we want to give them an outline of what to expect and what the sort of things they want to go through. But don't write notes down. Don't access your notes when you're recording that.
Yeah. We do occasionally when we're doing podcasts. They've got their laptop open and they're like, right, we're all ready. And literally 30 seconds before we go live, we both of us just reach over and steal the laptops away from them. They're like, what are you doing? We're like, you're not having that. The other things is focus on audio and content quality. Get really good quality audio, and by that I mean the recording of it, and also the content. The thinking about what you're actually going to be saying. Be consistent with your uploads, Tom. You were really consistent, almost too consistent, weren't you?
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing to think about. Don't overcommit.
Yeah.
If you can only manage once a month or once a quarter, then stick to that. But yeah.
And you said at the start about recording a series.
Yes.
And then launching them all at the same time.
Yeah, I was consistent putting out an episode every week for 18 months, which was far too much. And I wish in hindsight I've done it in chunks.
Yeah.
Done a series of maybe 10 episodes, had a break, and then gone back and done a second series.
Sure.
Which a lot of podcasters are doing now.
Yeah, that's certainly what we tend to do with our clients, isn't it? It's a series of 8.
Yeah.
We record 4 of them up front. And they are launched, and whilst they're being launched and marketed, we're recording the other 4s and editing the other 4.
Yeah.
And that works really nicely. And our final top tip was don't try and do it all yourself. Claire has just asked, will a copy of this webinar be available afterwards? Yes, we will email it to you. And if there's anything else we can do to help Claire, by all means, get in touch. The final thing that I just want to share with you is an upcoming masterclass that we've got. Now, this is it's a bit of a cheat, this, guys, and apologies if you're not a member of the Media Team Academy. If you're not, then come and talk to us about it. But we've got an upcoming masterclass for those of you that are members of the Media Team Academy, which is a fantastic subscription. So sign up on Thursday, 20th of July at 11 a.m. How to write op-eds that will get published. Meantime, all that's left to do, thank you very much to everybody behind the scenes here. Thank you very much to all of you guys for joining us. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome
for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And I hope everybody has a good afternoon. Take care.